Right now, 2%, less than 2% of the meat eaten in this state came from here. That seems crazy to me. I want to sell to 5,000 Montana families. It doesn't have to only be Montana, but I want a big chunk of them to be in Montana. That doesn't seem that crazy. That seems achievable.
It's interesting because how old are you?
I just turned 40.
40. So it's kind of funny because I remember, I'm pretty sure, didn't you play Little League Baseball?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we played against each other, but I was older. Like, I don't even know how much we played against each other if I saw you. But, like, I kind of knew you kids, like, growing up a little bit, but there was, a separation of 25 miles or whatever. And back then, no social media and internet and whatever. But like I had told you on the phone, which I don't think you knew, like, it was my folks, I think, that introduced Annette and Earl, your Aunt Annette, to each other. It's kind of wild. There's, I remember doing work on the Mannix ranch when I was a kid with my dad, because he has the excavation business.
Right. Yeah.
So he's done work for your guys' family for.
He sure has, yeah. I'm
long
always,
time.
Brent will talk about, well, we thought, wow, I'm going to try to save some money, do this. And then when Mark does it, it's fast.
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, my dad's not the cheapest guy per hour, but it's going to be fast and it's going to be done right.
Yeah. He's kind of a legend of practical skills around Elmville.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how many people we've worked for in that valley. I mean, frankly, most of my childhood growing up, well, not most of my high school career was spent working in Ovando. We did all the work on that Meredith place, Tom's across the river, and, a ton of people around that valley. But it happened to be during that time in the late 90s when Ovando kind of exploded with some of those people moving in. And I spent, sophomore year through high school and into college working down around Ovando for, half a dozen people, with my dad's business. So, and
at that same time you were making knives and scheming?
Yep. Yeah, no, I was, the work with my dad really was what paid for, new equipment for my shop, frankly. I was able to kind of make money during the summer. And what it's like with a family business. I mean, not that I didn't want to do it, but wasn't really also an option either, but I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed working, with my dad every year. And by then I had gotten to a level where I could do, I did a lot of stuff on Meredith, just, on my own. Dad would get me lined out and then he'd go off and do a different job, or, by then we had a couple people working for us. So I was, taking equipment down there and working down there and graveling roads and doing all the stuff that we did down there, digging foundations, and not to mention it's funny, there's the local Helmville Ovando people, and then there's the newbies, at least back then. Now they've been there 20 years, but well, some of those people have come and gone, but yeah, it's crazy. So we, and I remember coming to the Mannix ranch when I was a kid with Annette. I don't know if I was a kid, but even like junior high age or so, I remember going down and visiting Bert and Darlene, and, it's just such a beautiful ranch.
That's a good part of the world. Yeah. Were you there with Annette, or was it a school trip?
Just Annette. Okay. Yeah. I think just Annette. I remember going down there a few times with maybe Annette and Earl. Earl and I were, I was pretty close to Earl when I was young, because he's the one, frankly, before Annette, when he was married to my aunt, he's the one that really got me into hunting. My dad never hunted, so I give credit to him and a couple more guys for, Earl would take me hunting with him before I ever could have a license, and he's a big guy. I mean, I think he'd pack my fat little ass around, when I was a kid.
He can walk all day long.
Oh, that guy. Yeah. I mean, with all the logging he's done, especially back when he was in his, 30s and 40s, I mean, that guy could go. I'm sure he can still go, but I remember following him around. And then he had a cabin in Lincoln. He'd take me up deer hunting up there, and then I shot my first elk with him when I was like 12. He took me up hunting, and I shot a cow elk with him. which was pretty cool. So he was definitely kind of a mentor in that hunting space, because my dad didn't hunt, which was cool. And he was, a super ethical hunter, and he was a guy that would, take off hiking and go hike for 10 miles.
Yeah.
Seeing
country was a big part of it, I think. And
yeah,
he's a prince of a guy.
He is. Yeah, he's amazing. No, he's done quite a bit of logging on the Mannix Ranch over the decades, hasn't he?
Yep. Yeah, thinning.
Yeah.
Some of it commercial, but a lot of it thinning.
Yeah.
And he's been around the corrals when we need help, Brandon, or shipping.
Yeah.
And Annette and her sister Renee are just as much a part of the ranch as my dad and uncles, really.
Right. Is your dad Brent?
My dad's David.
David.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, Brent's the youngest. Brent was my
boss. There's 3 brothers, right? Brent and David and
Brent, Randy,
David,
and then Annette and Renee, and they all, the furthest one away is Annette.
Yeah. Which is wild, 25 miles away. Yeah, that's pretty wild. And Annette was my 4th grade teacher in school. When we met her, she was living in Belgrade, Montana.
Yep.
That's when I remember my first memories of meeting her.
Yeah, I remember Grandpa Bert would pick me up early in the morning before he'd go visit Annette in Belgrade, and I got to go a couple times as a toddler.
Yeah.
And I was still just looking forward to it, and Grandpa picking me up early and sleeping in the back of the car.
Yeah.
On the ride down there, and going to visit Annette for a couple of days. Take me off Mom's hands for a little bit.
Yeah, there you go. So what is the history of the Mannix Ranch? I mean, from what I remember, wasn't it founded in like 1880s or something?
Yeah, the Mannix side came there in 1882.
Okay.
And Tim Mannix was his name, and he had come on a hunting trip from New York and liked it so much he went back and got his boys, and they ended up coming out to stay. He had just lost his wife, is my understanding.
Oh, really?
And so it was sort of...
So he traveled out here to go hunting in 1886?
In 1882, I believe.
Think about that. To travel from New York to Montana today to go hunting is not a big thing. I mean, 4-hour plane flight and an hour car ride, and you're hunting. But in 1882, to go on a hunt in Montana, which Montana wasn't a state, would have been a territory. He had to have taken a train, I would imagine.
Yeah, I don't know, but it does. It's easy to say. It's like, oh yeah, he came out hunting from New York, but to think about the logistics of that, how much time it must have taken, and how much unknown. And there's not a map.
No, it's easy to just kind of scan over that, like, oh, he came out hunting, and like today, that's how you would say it. But back then, that would have been probably a multi-month adventure. I mean, it was. I don't know how long it would have taken to take a train back then out here, but I mean, a month.
I'm sure it was
weeks,
multi-month in terms of the whole round trip. Man, I can't imagine it being less than.
And then that's still a time period when there's still Native Americans out here, and really, I mean, obviously no highways. I mean trails, dirt, maybe wagon trails. But I mean, if you think about what the Helmville Valley looked like, for people that don't know, the Helmville Valley doesn't look a hell of a lot different today than it would have in the 1880s. I mean, there's a little town, and there's kind of your typical home places around the different ranches, but that place really resisted, and we'll get into this later, but it really resisted the subdivision kind of chopped up stuff that you've seen in a lot of beautiful areas. I mean, when you drive through Ovando, Helmville, Avon, it's still just incredibly beautiful. The residents there have done a really good job of keeping it intact, really. But back then, even still, I mean, you're talking wagon tracks.
Yeah, I mean, that's the days of, Virginia City boom. That's the days of oxen teams bringing stuff from Fort Benton as far as the barges could go up the Missouri, out to these areas where there was mining camps, and then the beginnings of agriculture.
Makes you wonder. I wonder when the railroad came through here. I wonder if he even took a railroad, or if he came out to like St. Louis and then took a barge up to Fort Benton, which is highly possible. I mean, that's how Lewis and Clark, and that's how that whole adventure happened. But by then, there, like you say, there were barges coming up. So maybe he came up the river. I don't know if you.
I don't know. I think there's a bit of a black box here for us. There's a different side of the family, my grandma's side, that got there a little earlier, he had come out to Montana in 1864. His name was John Moore. He had fought on the north and his brother on the south.
Really?
From West Virginia. And he
Did they both survive?
I believe so, because later, like in the 1990s, we got a call from this family in Plant City, Florida, that said, we have all these letters from your ancestor. We think it's your ancestor. Do you live in Hillville, Montana?
Really?
Back to our ancestor, and they were brothers. And we only have the one-way letters written from our ancestor, John Moore, to his brother, and a lot of it was, trying to explain why he had come out west, what he had discovered when he got there.
Wow.
Why he had fought on the north, and clearly they had a disagreement.
Yeah. What was it like reading those letters?
It was pretty incredible. I mean, had no idea that they existed, and to have that just dropped in your lap one day is amazing.
You guys still have those?
Yeah. Yeah, my Aunt Rainey has kind of published them, and so that we have a few copies. And it's just him writing about some of the things they were growing. He had come out, I think, was in Helena briefly, Last Chance Gulch, mining, then made his way to Blackfoot City, which in its own right, I think, was 1,000 people up in the hills.
Yeah.
Kind of between Avon and Helmville, this little place we call Finn, where the Gettle Ranch is today. Up in the mountains there's Blackfoot City, and then mining kind of quieted down there. He settled in the Blackfoot Valley, and I think he would raise cattle, and he raised crops
probably
too. Some of the things
then.
he was and sheep, and some of the things he was growing. I'm not sure whether to believe the bushels of potatoes he said he was getting.
Really?
But I think he was bringing up to Garnett, what was then Garnett, and now it's Garnett Ghost Town.
Yeah.
But I think agriculture kind of developed to feed the mining camps, and then as mining petered out, that's what stayed.
It is interesting listening to stories and videos about the letters of what people were writing, from whether it was, San Francisco, the gold rush days back there, or Montana or whatever, back to the East Coast about, it did seem like sometimes they had the ability to exaggerate just a little bit of the gold that's just laying in the creeks, like you just walking along picking up nuggets and
and the inexhaustible agricultural productivity.
The inexhaustible minerals and
from somebody in the West writing that back to somebody in the East. Our land doesn't have close to the fast metabolism of some of those places.
Right.
In terms of productivity.
Yeah. Yeah, we're lucky to get 1.5 cuttings of hay in, maybe a week second cutting in your neck of the woods.
In the Blackfoot Valley in particular, even just for this region, the water table is pretty darn high in the base of the valley.
Yeah.
And it keeps soil cold for quite a bit. It takes a while to warm up, and so it shortens our growing season even all that much more.
Yeah, where other places in the country are getting 4 cuttings of hay.
Yeah, we'll grow. We've got water and a pretty good water resource, and we got that later into the season because of the dam and the flood irrigation that feeds the valley.
Yeah.
But it takes a while for that heavy clay soil with a high water table to warm up, so roots are ready to.
Yeah, and it's dependent on the particular year. Sometimes we heat up a lot, in late May and early June, and sometimes it's cold halfway through June and feels like it doesn't heat up till the 4th of July, really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's pretty rugged. I mean, I think somebody out in Winnett, Montana, or Malta, might challenge us for how rugged we are. I mean, the thing about Helmville that kind of makes it unique is it, on one hand, it's in some ways looks like it did, back in the day, and it's right south of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex with Glacier north of that. But it's not very far from anything. It's not very far from Missoula. It's not very far from Helena.
Right.
I don't want to paint too beautiful a picture.
Yeah. Don't move there.
But it's just sort of an anachronism in the middle of places people know. But I think it's a beautiful anachronism. I love that community.
What did those letters say about how did he talk about the Montana, and do you remember anything in particular that he talked about, or even with the Civil War and stuff, some of that stuff? Do you remember any of those things that?
I can't quote from it at all. Some of it was, like I mentioned, it was about some of the crops he was growing, and potatoes was kind of sticks in my mind as I can't remember what bushels per, per unit acreage he was talking about. But I looked at Dad and I'm like, does that seem right to you? And he was like, not today, I don't think. Not that we grow a lot of vegetables. But I mean, it was lofty language about Montana, about the wild place that it was, about, looking away down back east where you are.
Yeah.
I feel like I could almost see you.
Yeah.
He was talking about how high up they were. And you could tell he was trying to rekindle a relationship that had been challenged.
Yeah, sure.
And he mentioned a few things about the war, and I think mostly just acknowledging the tension and saying, I'd sure like to have a letter back from you.
Yeah. You think about the, again, it's easy to glaze over like, oh, he sent some letters. I mean, just the challenge to get communication from one place to another, especially a place like Montana. I mean, it's not like he was in New York, a place like Montana down into the South somewhere, expecting that you won't have an answer to those letters at best for months. If those letters get there, and if you never hear back, did they get there?
Yeah.
Did they not get there?
You're sending it into the void.
You really are. And, I asked my grandma Smith, who would probably be around 95 right now or a little older, before she passed away a couple of years ago, what the biggest change in her life was. Because, I mean, people like Bert and Darlene or my grandma saw, they went from pretty much no or few cars to, Instagram and Facebook and social media and, space travel and everything that they saw, the changes they saw. And to her, the biggest, most impactful change to her on their ranch out in southeast Colorado was a telephone. Because she could call her sister in Kansas and like see how they're doing. She could call a doctor in town when she was getting ready to have a baby or had a sick kid, or, and you think about that, like how for granted we take that. I mean, now you walk around with a phone in your pocket. It's pretty amazing. So that, the ability to communicate, or the inability back then, is pretty incredible. And you even think about planting crops back then and the challenges of getting seed, and irrigating. You'd have to really think about what cropland you're trying to farm, and you don't have any big John Deere tractors, and it's just everything back then was just so difficult and so hard. It's pretty amazing to think about just how tough those people were.
It truly is, yeah. My Aunt Rainey lives in the Homestead House on the ranch, and a few years ago, maybe 7-8 years ago, it almost burned down. And it was actually Grandma up on the hill who kind of saw the smoke early in the morning, and she walked down in her 80s and made it across the cattle guard and to get him out of bed. And anyway, the local fire department volunteers showed up and managed to put it out. And I think the brothers got together. It's a ranch house, and they got together with Rainey, and they all just decided, should we preserve this? It would be far cheaper to wipe it and build a new one.
Yeah.
But they decided we're going to preserve it. And Rainey leading the charge on that. She fiercely loves that place. And when they, fixing the foundation and pulling up the old floors, I mean, besides petrified cats and that kind of thing, they found these old, wooden shoes that seemed handmade nails, things that were just from a completely different era, and now they're hanging on Rainey's wall.
Yeah.
And that stuff is really striking. It's almost impossible to transport yourself back. I think it is impossible, and really come to terms with what their life was like compared to ours. And I think in some ways probably the technology of today puts different kinds of pressure on us.
Oh, for sure.
And so that, and blessedly they didn't have some of those pressures.
Yeah, and it's when I was out hunting in the Missouri River Breaks a few years ago, I was just hiking along, and I happened to along an old homestead, that was abandoned. It was dug into the hillside, and unlike your neck of the woods, I mean, wouldn't have been that difficult in Helmville to build a little log cabin, and you have resources there to do that kind of stuff. But out in the Missouri River Breaks where I was at, there wasn't a tree bigger than 4 inches around for, a long, long ways. And this place was built out of some hand-hewn timbers. They dug it into the hillside, and actually they had this kind of cellar that went back in pretty deep into the hillside where you could tell they had food storage and whatnot. And then they used mud to insulate in between all the timbers. They did have metal and stuff kind of over the roof, but you could, and they hand bent everything, kind of formed it around to keep water from dripping in, and handmade nails. And then there was a little wood cook stove that was probably also just the heat for the cabin. I mean, that entire cabin was the size of this part of the room right here. An old table there, and things that have been left. And it's hard to just not. And it was probably 5.5 feet tall. You know, I had to hunch over. And you think of the most of the, like the metal and a lot of the stuff, the wood cook stove had to have come up a barge on the Missouri. I had to have ordered that somehow and had it dropped off. But just the hardship of those days to live there. And then they deal with what you guys don't, which is more of the harsh extremes with wind. And right. I mean, you do it with a little bit of it, but out there it's pretty brutal country.
Exposed.
Exposed, where you guys get more of the deep snow. But anyway, I could go down a rabbit hole because I you stand in those places and you just start to imagine, you take all of the comforts out of today and all of the ease of getting things, and it's but it would have been a pretty rewarding lifestyle. And also when it gets dark, there was nothing to do but hang out with your family and, write a letter by a candlelight, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Grandpa always said his goal was, once he retired to logging, so that the boys could have more, autonomy on the ranch. Yeah. And he always joked with them that he was going to drive by with his logging truck and blow smoke on those peasants in the field and smoke cigars and smile at the missus.
Yeah, that's funny.
But I mean, I think they appreciate a pace of life that's it's almost not available now, unless you really are intentional about it.
So what's the difficulty? You spin all the way forward to today. What are the challenges? I don't, and you don't have to say it, but I don't know the size of your ranch, but the point is your ranch isn't massive. You're not thousands and thousands of cattle. And in farming and ranching, it seems lately like it's kind of an economy of scale. If you're not massive, it's a real challenge to really survive and make some pretty serious money. And if you find yourself in that middle ground between, big enough it has to be full time, but not big enough to really do well, I think it's forced people to get creative to survive and be successful. And we've seen a lot of ranches go away, get sold out to bigger ranches, or the smaller farms to bigger farms, where you guys have been able to be creative. And also, you have multiple families that you have to support. It's not just, one family. Mm-hmm. What are those challenges of a modern day ranch today that you guys have faced along with other ranchers and farmers?
Well, the biggest and the simplest way to describe it, I think, is just that the business does not produce cash in a proportion that the land costs.
Yeah.
Those two things they once were related, but they're completely separated. And so even in our family, there's three business entities, and two of them own land, and one of them owns cattle and equipment. Mm-hmm. Even if you just take the cattle and equipment enterprise, the cash that the business produces each year is not enough to buy it from my folks' generation.
Sure.
Not with a 2% loan and not with a 30-year amortization.
Right.
So, and 1,200 mother cows, thereabouts, finishing yearlings and 2-year-olds, because we have a small meat program. Most of what we sell, 70% is commodity, calves and yearlings. And but we have for about 20 years or so, 17 years, 20 years, it's right in that ballpark. We've had a local beef program where we finish them, fatten them in Montana, process them here, and sell them locally. And some timber. My Uncle Randy's a forester. That's what his degree was in. There's NRCS contracts you can get to thin timber, partially for fire, partially for grassland and habitat. Mm-hmm. And Yeah, I mean, the way our family's made it work. So there's 3 couples, 3 families, my dad and mom and dad's 2 brothers and their spouses, and then there's 3 of my siblings and 3 of my first cousins all back working it, plus some couple hired folks. And the way we've made it work is to lease private ranches near us.
Yep.
That we could never afford to buy.
Right.
We've also utilized conservation easements to buy a little bit more.
Sure.
But it wouldn't have been possible without that tool.
Explain what that tool is. I mean, we're pretty familiar with it in Montana, but what is a conservation easement?
So basically, a conservation easement sells a certain package of property rights to subdivide or to develop oil and gas or mine, and it sets those aside, and they're no longer on the table, but there's a cash transaction there, and not always. Sometimes easements are donated as a tax write-off. Mm-hmm. But it can essentially, it decreases the value of the land because you sell some of those property rights, but you can continue to do agriculture. Mm-hmm. And so we have utilized 3 of those conservation easements, 1 with the state of Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and 2 with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service over the years. Mm-hmm. And that's been part of allowing us to have a bigger operation that's more contiguous and has better efficiency.
Some of that stuff, like for people that don't know, like with FWPs, some of that's like stream maintenance and rehabilitation and keeping the fisheries healthy.
Yep.
Either rehabbing damaged streams or preserving good streams. Maybe it's keeping cattle out of a certain section of stream. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, in this particular case, it was the conservation easement that FWP put. It was through a program called Habitat Montana, and that was really more about just preserving open space and wildlife habitat. But there are plenty of stream programs as well where it's not that you can't graze them, but you've got to rest them. Right. So you can come in, you can graze intensively, but then you got to get off. And if you hammer stream banks, and over time that stream will broaden out, right, become more shallow, the water gets warmer, and it's no longer a fishery feeder of the Blackfoot River. And so we've done several different restoration projects that usually in partnership with a nonprofit like the Blackfoot Challenge or the Blackfoot chapter of Trout Unlimited. Mm-hmm. Some of that money came from Bonneville Power, the dam, to basically lease some in-stream flow and give us the confidence that, okay, even if our irrigation productivity goes down, this will make up for it. But it turns out everybody involved, even if there wasn't that lease money, once we kind of got up and running, we got some fish screens in ditches so that fish didn't run down out in the meadow.
Yep.
And the stream very quickly, actually, with the spring runoff, that silt filled in the banks again. The stream deepened. There's a really cool Trout Unlimited video that shows how much cooler the water was as it reached the Blackfoot River in one of the hottest months on record.
Really?
Than it was just a few years before that. And that wasn't just there was a ton of properties, along the way on this riparian area all the way to the river. But it makes a big difference. And I think a lot of it is just the folks who first got in that valley, they weren't thinking about those things.
No.
And first of all, you didn't have some of the tools of observation.
Right.
But second of all, it was survival.
Yep.
And so as you become cognizant of it, go, we do care about that resource.
Well, there's a way to survive and keep those resources
That's
functional.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, and for people that don't understand that, if you let cattle just stand in that every day all summer long, they break down that root system in those banks. They get muddy, and then water comes along and erodes that stuff and it flattens out that stream. But if you graze that, and like you say, you chop that grass down, but then you get those cattle out of there, they don't have the chance to erode those banks and damage those banks, and
right.
keeps the stream good. It's
really biomimicry.
Yeah.
You're trying to how would
bison or
how would
elk,
wild ungulates use that landscape?
Yeah, they don't hang out there when the grass is gone. They're moving on to the next piece of grass.
That's right. Yeah, a plant needs rest.
Right.
And so you can provide that artificially on a ranch with management.
Yeah.
And so the holy grail is to try to figure out, okay, let's be agriculturally productive and survive in the marketplace. And if we can maintain or even in some cases improve fertility, ecological function over time, that is a win-win.
You know, it's interesting. This is happening not just for ranchers, but even just for regular people, where property values are no longer in balance with the business side of paying for them. So for a lot of people, and frankly for me, just here recently, I was sold a little piece of property, and I'm like, well, maybe I'll roll it into like a rental house around here, and I started pricing out what it would cost to buy a house, and around the Missoula Frenchtown area, you're looking $500,000-$700,000. I mean, you know, 600. Let's just say $600,000 bucks. Mm-hmm. So to pay for that, loan, you know, my payment's going to be $4,200 to $4,500 a month. And so how am I going to pay for that? Well, you're going to rent it. Trying to rent a house out for $4,500 a month, and tell me how many people you have knock on your door that want to rent it. Yep. When rent typically, you know, is $1,500 to $2,000, $2,500 a month. Even at $3,000 a month, you're still $1,000, $1,500 short every single month for the next 30 years. Now, granted, you're having a renter help pay for that, but they're not paying for it. And so then you have to decide to yourself, do I have the money to just give up that extra money plus taxes and insurance and all the other stuff? And it made me real quickly go, I can't afford to do that, or I don't want to do that. Same thing for ranching. You know, you if you want to expand your ranch and you're looking at the, you know, if Jimmy Stone wants to sell his ranch, right? And somebody can come in from out of state and wants to pay him $15 million for it. But the only way you can afford it is to pay $2 million. Well, that's a pretty big gap. You know, Jimmy Stone would have to really like you guys and really want to see it stay a ranch in the valley. And you know, occasionally that happens, but that's the real challenge. And so like you're saying, the ability, maybe that guy from out of state does come pay that $15 million bucks, but hopefully that person will still find it important to see locals and see those ranches be used for ranching, and then they'll lease it to you for a price that's going to not anywhere near pay their mortgage on it. But at a level that you guys can make a little bit of money, it can still be an operating cattle ranch. It maintains the ground. We see some of these ranches, you know, they take the ranchers off of it, the cattle off of it, and the maintenance of the place, the weeds that come in, you know, the stewards of that property, the best stewards of that property are the people that own it. Those ranchers they don't want to see weeds. They don't want to see, you know, out of control erosion or, you know, the fence is getting, you know, dilapidated. And so it is a good idea for some of these wealthy people to come in and let a family like yours lease it and do the maintenance, do the hard work to keep that ranch in operating condition.
Yeah, when a landscape just kind of gets set aside, and it's not as if the wild critters are behaving like they used to and using it like they used to. So in effect, it becomes, just stagnant.
And fire danger. I mean, the grasses get deep. It dries out in August. The timber management isn't there. That's where we see, you know, frankly, private property, we see the best timber management. Our lack of timber management on public ground has really led to some catastrophic fires, just with the unwillingness or inability to log like maybe we should, to do some proper thinning.
Yeah, our relationship with fire as a country has been, you know, the thinking for a long time was prevent it.
Yeah.
But it's part of it. And you prevent it for long enough, and now you got more extreme fires. Mm-hmm. And a much more difficult management situation because people live there now and there's houses and in that wooey, they call it.
Yeah.
And so it is a sticky one.
Yeah.
How do you let fire be back a part of the system again? You know, how can we do forestry in a way that makes sense? And forestry is an important part of it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and someone like Earl and people that log really in a way that's intentional. It's done in a way that is a benefit to the landscape. You know, there were definitely some poor logging practices in the 50s, 60s, and 70s where, you know, they're just wiping out some giant swaths of mountains of the timber, and that obviously has its negative effects. But I think we've come a long, long way since then. It's kind of like the old timers that were the ranchers that just didn't maybe know at the time what they were doing. But I think that's largely over, frankly, by law, but also just by the loggers themselves understand that by doing it the right way, there's that's going to grow back, quicker and have the ability to log it again someday.
Yep.
If it's done in the right way. How have you guys become so well known? I mean, the Mannix beef name now has become like a big name. I see it in restaurants, on a menu, or you see it. I see you guys at farmers markets. Your guys' website's really nice. Like, how has that just been a long time coming and a slow growth, or has it just kind of happened pretty quickly overnight?
It's been pretty slow. I think originally Nina Hassanen from University of Montana, she had I'm not going to say it right, but ecological studies program. And she had gotten to know the family by coming out and taking students out. And she suggested, why don't you guys try to sell locally? And our first kind of large customer was the Good Food Store in Missoula. And they started buying. We experimented with finishing ourselves. And, for people that don't know, I mean, the way that most animals are finished, or that just means fat and brought to market weight, is most of these calves or yearlings leave Montana. They go to a feeder, usually in a more concentrated operation that uses cereal grains. Mm-hmm. And then they're sold to a packer, and the packer sells to a distributor, and the distributor sells to the retailer.
So there's a lot of fingers in that pot along the way.
Yeah, it's gotten to be a pretty streamlined national system of getting meat to the customer. Mm-hmm. You bring the animals close to the feed source, and you fatten them as consistently as you can. You process them at large scale, a couple thousand head per day. And for reference, like the biggest processing plant in Montana might do 25 a day.
Yeah.
So it's a different thing to keep them in Montana, not use grain, and get animals to a fat market weight where it's a good eating experience completely on the ranch. You have to, rework your management, and then you have to learn to work with the local processor. We work with a great outfit called Superior Meat Processing in Superior, Montana. And, you learn, okay, this...
You guys are the reason I can't get my beef in there in the fall.
Jerry is an absolute prince of a man.
Yeah.
And incredibly hard worker. And, has taught us a lot about, learning what's on the carcass and how to utilize things, and has delivered to a lot of our Missoula customers over the years. And the family, guy named Scott Barger, he worked for the family for a long time. He's a giant of a guy. Mm-hmm. And he'd love to visit, and so he'd talk to people at the farmers market, work to get like ground beef at the Top Hat Lounge, and in the Good Food Store, and then eventually they expanded a little bit. They started selling in Helena, and then during COVID, my brother Scott moved on to manage a different ranch up by Cascade, and my brother Logan took over the meat business, and helped by my cousin Ashley and all the family, whether showing up at the farmers market. Randy and Mo would do the Sealy Lake farmers market. Yeah. And they just kind of very slowly built it. COVID definitely was a big spike, and all of a sudden we didn't have enough processing capacity. But that spike has dropped back down, but it didn't come back down to where it was. So it was a net growth.
Yeah.
So direct to consumer is probably about 40% of the business, and wholesale locally is about 60% of the business. And so we basically, as a family, kind of came to this point where we like selling it locally. We like that relationship with the customer and being part of the community, and you have a connection that had been gone.
Yeah.
All you do, you produce cows, and somebody somewhere buys it. And we say meat from some place is about the same as meat from no place.
Yeah.
It becomes anonymous. And so we like the connection. And yet we had gotten to the scale where the local meat business was complex enough. We needed to either grow so that we could afford the additional management it takes.
Yeah.
Or kind of retreat from it a little bit. Mm-hmm. Nobody really wanted to retreat from it. And yet all the time packing meat orders in the freezer, the fact that we also don't have more room at Superior to process more animals. We don't have the capital to build our own processing facility. Do we have the labor force in Helmville that could even operate a facility like that? All those questions. And we don't have, the culinary and marketing skills that it takes to scale a meat business. It's a really complex and low margin business.
Yep.
So I kind of came to the family and said, I was living in town. I still live in Helena, married a Helena girl. And I had been part of a separate thing that our family was part of, a cooperative in the West that we tried to build a beef brand right out of college, and that failed. Mm-hmm. I got a bath in the meat business and a bath in business. And I said, well, what if that former thing was called Rancher's Original. We didn't own anything. We were a brand. So we would aggregate cattle in the West. We would bring them. They were Cole cows and bulls, so it was a lean meat supply chain. The Cole just means breeding stock that didn't breed up or lost a calf. And we were going to, the idea was a domestic U.S. grass-fed line of lean beef that could be sold to the Chipotles of the world.
Yeah.
Anyway, we would bring cattle to Greeley, Colorado, where they're processed, found a few big buyers for wholesale trim from these Cole animals. And almost overnight, our packer had a heart attack and died, and his wife had to sell the grinding facility in Fort Morgan that we depended on. The country of origin labeling was repealed in Congress, so that.
Which I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so that it made a big deal because our value proposition was low cost domestic grass-fed beef from stewardship in the West.
Right.
And that became much more difficult because we were competing with imports, grass-fed imports that were much cheaper than ours. And then the third thing that happened was that our largest buyer, who was buying semi-loads of trim at a time, a new board came in, changed the direction of the company. It was actually a veggie burger company that started doing an omnivore burger. They were mixing beef with flax and sweet potato. And anyway, the new board took it in a different direction pretty quick. We didn't have enough sales. So we closed it up and said, we kind of licked our wounds. Mm-hmm. And I had gone to a group called Western Landowners Alliance, working for them, kind of a policy organization. We worked on things like state wildlife migration, Endangered Species Act, how that affects working lands in the West, mm-hmm. Farm Bill. And I came to the family and I just said, what if we work with other Montana ranches to get capital, build processing, build the marketing and kind of culinary infrastructure it takes, because we can't. I don't think we could have done it alone.
Right.
So then we created in early 2020 something called Old Salt CoOp, and that's what I do full time now. And that's basically, my family's part of it, but there's several other ranchers, and the goal is to build a brand that more family ranches can join over time if we can prove the ability to move meat.
Yep.
And so what we say is Old Salt is damn fine Montana meat. Like that's we're not trying to be too precious about it.
Yeah.
We like start to finish Montana supply chain that we raise, buy the animals, process the animals, and sell the meat.
Yep.
And if you were going to build your own processing facility, Manx program, we sell, let's say, 300 beef a year through locally, and the rest is all commodity. Build a facility, and you're going to run 3,000 a year through that facility to pay the bank note. So that's a lot of scale and growth.
Yeah.
So we needed to kind of take a big swing, and doing meat takes so much infrastructure, and a lot of that infrastructure is refrigerated.
Right.
And so the capital costs are huge.
Yeah. And
then the marketing that has to be done is just another level. So it takes serious amount of capital.
Well, it's like with our business. I knew this from the start that you can make the greatest product you want. You have to be able to sell it. And when I met my business partner Brandon, originally just was hiring him to do some content and some stuff, shoot some content and whatnot, and realized his abilities. I knew I had to, have him as a partner, because it doesn't matter how good your beef is or whatever the facts are. Like, you still have to be able to tell people. They still have to find out about it, and you still have to be able to execute on that and actually deliver. And so it's a huge part of it, the marketing side. The co-op thing is something I'm so glad you guys are doing this and thinking this way, because you're going up against the meat packers of America. What is there? 4 major large meat packers, I think. And the lobbyists that they have in Washington that tie into the, Food Drug Administration. And, I think that the repealing of that, that act with the country of origin is a perfect example. You can't tell me that most of those senators and representatives in Washington actually believe that we shouldn't have a label on our packet, our meat that says made in America, grown in America, whatever. You can't tell me that they don't agree with that. I believe there's a dirtiness. That's the dirtiness of Washington. Of where's the lobbying? Where's the campaign fund financing stuff coming from? Why would they repeal an act that any red-blooded American, I would think, would agree on, that we want to know where our food comes from? Now, if it says grown in Brazil or grown in Canada or whatever, and you want to buy Brazilian meat, fine, it's free market. But I want to go to a store, and when I see that it's Montana or American beef, that's the beef I'm going to want to buy. And now with the dirtiness of those cattle can be bred, born, and raised pretty much in a foreign country and then brought here and finished and slaughtered. And that's what they consider American beef.
Well, it's not. It's even a step beyond that, where you can ship a box of meat here, take it out of a package, repackage it, and it's a product of the USA. And so it's, the reason,
I didn't know that.
The system, has kind of built itself up to do what it does and to be efficient, and it doesn't like drags on the way it's been set up to work. And so I think at the end of the day, that's really what it's about, is not wanting to change.
When you look at the staggering rise in price of beef in the last 7 years or so, 5 years, since COVID and really before that, but it hasn't been a one-to-one comparison as to what ranchers are getting. The price of beef right now or price of cattle is better than it's been, but it's nowhere near proportional to the rise, what you're seeing on the price per pound at Costco.
Yeah, that's true.
And there are so many hands in that pot between the rancher and the consumer. And I've thought for several years now that ranchers need to co-op with each other, because you're right. Even ranches 2 and 3 times your guys' size are still not going to be able to really market and compete in a real significant way. But that economy of scale that we talked about earlier, where you start to combine forces, and also that we call it community marketing in our business, where you're going out and just talking to people and you're telling people, well, the more ranchers you have join that, the more they're spreading that word in their small town. And that the more of those people like, oh, we're getting our beef from Old Salt, and oh, the rancher down the road. And next thing you know, they're buying their beef from Old Salt, and they're buying Mannix. They're getting Mannix beef, but it's because rancher in Helena, told his friend about it. And so seeing ranchers band together, and I see lots of ranchers trying this similar method that you guys really, I think, were maybe not first at, but definitely early adopters of the direct-to-consumer. You see Little Belt Cattle Company over in eastern Montana trying to do this. You see Colorado Craft Beef down in Colorado. And that's the thing nationwide is if everybody if these ranchers in every state did something similar and were able to just supply their own residents, forget about going around the country, even just supplying their own states with beef, you would start to actually have an impact on those packers and on some of the dirtiness of that system. That's what I'm hopeful for.
Yeah, me too. I think take that big kind of consolidated system and make it much more regionalized, where more people have control over their own infrastructure.
Yeah.
More people have access to their own clientele that has a reason to buy from them locally for whatever reason. Might be because of their interest in land conservation. It might be because of a perceived cleaner product or health benefits. Well, it might be just, I want to do business with neighbors, and I want a more resilient food system in my backyard, so that when one plant gets COVID and shuts down, you've got 10,000 hogs sitting there waiting to be processed, and it's cheaper just to slaughter them and bury them in a hole than it is to keep feeding them and wait for that plant to open back up. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
No.
So the big system is pretty damn deficient when it's working. When it breaks, it's the opposite of that.
Yeah, it's efficient, but is it really beneficial for, you know, the American farmer and rancher? You know, and that's the, you know, there's it's nice to have efficiency, but also it can't come at the cost of American businesses and American, you know, families. And there's the other economical part of this, which is the recycling of dollars within your own area, right? Yep. So, you know, if you live in Great Falls and you're buying beef that was grown in Helmville or Roundup, Montana, or wherever the hell, Lewistown, at least you can feel like your dollars are being recycled in your own state. And I don't blame anybody, and you know that in Washington State, if ranchers were starting this over there, and I live in Washington, I want to buy Washington beef. That's great. Idaho, you know, Wyoming, there's room for this to happen. You know, because Old Salt Co-op's never going to get to the point where it can supply all the beef for the entire nation. But it doesn't need to. It just needs to supply, you know, a nice geographical region and make everybody a little bit more money.
That'd be the wrong goal, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be.
To grow and then become the problem that you're trying to fight against.
Right. But if it helps these ranchers also keep a little bit more of that dollar, you know, whether it's being lost to feedlots or packers, you know, the processing portion, at least the processing portion with you guys, you know when you're spending money on your processing, it's being spent locally. Mm-hmm. Superior Meats is fantastic. It's where we take our beef and our hogs, unless they're too full because too many of Mannix's beef are in there. But our 4-H animals go there. Yep. You know, they've been great. They're about 40 minutes west of us here. That's a whole nother challenge of starting processing plants. You know, I don't think people really realize, and I really don't know what happened. I think maybe it was because of COVID, but we never had a problem getting a hog or a beef that we raised here butchered. And since COVID, you call up in July or August to schedule, you know, to bring your animal in August or October, November, and they're like, well, we're booked out until February. It's like, what are you talking about? And at literally every butcher shop, we've had some times where we couldn't go there. We had to go up to White's Meats or, you know, Lolo Locker. There's all these different places around, and every one of them are having the same issue. But the challenges to start a beef processing or a meat processing plant with the food and drug rules and all the permitting and the processes, I don't even know if they will allow a new one in Missoula County, frankly, by rule.
It's a very difficult thing to build one of those places.
And it's hard work, very hard work. So keeping employment or keeping employees that's a hard job. And there, like you say, there's not a ton of margin, so it's hard to pay an employee $35 an hour to cut meat.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we looked at 30-some properties in the Helena Valley in Lewis and Clark County, and we're told no for some reason every time with respect to livestock slaughter. And usually it was because, even in agricultural zoning, basically the planners were able to interpret the zoning regulations in a way that, yes, it allows for the processing of agricultural commodities, but it doesn't specifically say livestock slaughter, and so sorry, we'd rather not see it. So we have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on plans that will never be built because we thought something was going to work, and then we were eventually told no. We finally closed on a piece of property in March that it's 6 acres adjacent to 18 that we went under contract for, that's not zoned, and it's on the very outskirts of any, you know, zoning envelope in the Lewis and Clark area. And finally, after 3 years of trying, I think we've got the place we can build. In the meantime, we bought a small facility that used to be called K&S. There's 2 little 1,000 square foot buildings on a half acre in commercial light manufacturing area in Helena, right in Helena proper. Also, same thing. City won't let us slaughter there, even though we're surrounded by a pet crematory and a shipping company. It's not like slaughter wouldn't be appropriate, but there's a city ordinance that says you can't hold more than 2 large livestock at a time unless you're a pet store or a vet clinic. And, you know, convincing a bank and bringing the capital stack together that you need to build a facility is pretty hard when there's a big uncertainty of how long the process will take to work with the city and say, how do we make one more exemption to that ordinance?
Right. And we're finding that out with what we're trying to do right now, that you can put an application in for something and then just hear nothing for months. It's incredibly frustrating.
The other thing too is, I mean, during COVID, the federal government put out a lot of dollars, loan and grant, to build processing facilities. But the U.S. cattle supply right now, I believe, is at about 70%. And so there's less cattle, and that means the big guys are paying more for them. That's part of the reason what's driving up the price of livestock for ranchers currently. That'll go back down, but right now it's high. But if you're a little plant that started up, the competition for those animals is huge. And there's a lot of pretty new plants that are likely going to be selling some used equipment on the market. Yeah. And so you don't just build the plant. You've got to have a brand that moves a product. Yeah. And it's not as if I know exactly how to do that, but the marketing is the most important thing. And
that Old Salt name is such a great name. It's an easy one to remember. I see people start businesses and companies, and you have to, Brandon says it takes 7 times somebody hearing your name or your brand before they'll remember it or take an action. That action might only just be clicking on your website to look, and they might go away. But you have to have something easy to remember. That Old Salt name and some of the branding you guys have done is really, really good.
Well, I think that people need to see themselves as part of agriculture. Mm-hmm. It's not just the producers. We've gotten used to saying, oh, yeah, ag is farming and ranching, but ag is everybody eating. Mm-hmm. And I think people want to see the small towns in our state thrive, and I think they want to see these lands stay open and provide the habitat that they do. And if Old Salt is going to work, it's because a community of people, not just the ranchers, but we now have 50-some employees, the butchers, the folks working in the restaurants that we have, then the customers. Mm-hmm. And the people that have helped capitalize this company are also community members, and it's building a group of people that is like together. There's no such thing in my mind as regenerative agriculture as like a set of magic practices that if you just do, you'll spend less money, you'll make more money because you'll be more productive with less inputs, and then you'll just put a stamp on that says regenerative and go sell it in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. Anything that is going to regenerate or just is going to be a system, and it takes all the elements of that system working at the same time, the production and the manufacturing and the buying to build something that works and lasts. And I hope that people will see Old Salt as a way to make their communities better.
Are you finding, are you guys finding success in it? Are you guys moving meat and feel like you're getting the word out?
We're moving meat. We need to ramp that up in a huge way. We've actually focused in the initial years on doing things that are a little bit tangential to meat to bring cash in the door. And so the first thing we did was we launched a burger joint on Last Chance Gulch in Helena. We leased a space within a bar that had a liquor license called the Gold Bar. And we sell burgers, and it moves 500 to 800 pounds of meat a week. And it did a good amount of sales in the first 2 years. This is the third year it's open, and it's been a marketing tool.
And also people don't know with it's easy to tell ranchers like, well, you should just sell your own beef. Well, everybody wants to buy ribeyes, and some sirloins. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that steer left that there's not a lot of people looking for a lot of stew meat, and so you have to be able to grind a lot of that meat up because for the amount of ribeyes and prime rib or whatever that's in a beef, that's a fraction of that animal. So having an outlet for that burger, I know I was talking to Ben Slatt about that. Your guys' neighbors somewhat up there. Yep. Wayne and Ben and on Two Creek Ranch, and finding outlets just for the burger portion of it is huge. So starting your own burger joint like that that's really smart.
It was a good place to start for us, and it was not capital intensive. It was a way to kind of prove the concept. Will the community show up for this? And we render our own tallow, and we cook potatoes in actual animal fat like McDonald's used to do, and it's just better. Yeah. And so the product has to be good. The second thing we did was a much bigger swing, and we opened it 2 weeks ago. The Union is a butcher shop and wood-fired grill in Helena, right across the street from our current place. And that's, we're moving 4 carcasses a week through there, balancing 129 muscles or however many are on an animal.
Yeah.
And so it's the restaurant basically trying to design a menu that can serve the ranch and the customer well.
Yeah.
And anyway, the idea was that those 2 places could be built-in marketing, an outlet for some product to be able to, take things that might be building up in inventory, utilize them, present them in a beautiful way, and create enough cash for our overhead to live under as we really ramp up a meat brand.
Yeah. And it's cool because if someone comes to a place and they have a burger or they have a steak and they really enjoy it and they know, well, I can buy that from that same supplier and cook those burgers, because frankly, eating out's very, very expensive now. So but we barbecue at our house probably 5 days a week. We eat some form of meat every dang night. So day 6 and 7 might be, tacos or spaghetti or something.
Right.
But to go have a good burger in Helena and then know I can come back to Frenchtown and say, man, that was really good. I want to get on their website and get some burger from them. How have you guys found those challenges as far as shipping? And do you guys ship out of state?
Old Salt does. So there's a couple things that the plan has been, as Old Salt stands up and gets on its feet, will basically absorb the direct-to-consumer side of the Mannix brand.
Okay.
And then continue. That's kind of been the story. Is if you're a family ranch trying to run a meat company also from soup to nuts, you're going to have a lack of control over processing and just only so much time to spend packing orders when you need to be changing water and managing livestock.
Right.
And so we're trying to build some efficiencies that way.
Yeah.
Old Salt is meant to be a servant of the ranches.
Yeah.
To say, we're going to go out and we're going to meet a group of customers. And we're going to get to know them. We're going to build a following. And they're going to be part of this regenerative agriculture that we're trying to create.
Sure.
And I think if you just go process meat and pay a third party to do that and then try to live off of just the sales of the branded product, there's not enough margin.
Yeah.
You've got to stack things together. And so the way we've done it with Old Salt that I think is different than, we're actually not a co-op. We started as an Old Salt Cooperative Association. That wasn't the brand, but that was the legal form of our business. And then it turned out that was because we were doing restaurants, because we were doing events, because we were doing processing, got multiple businesses going on. It was too complex from a legal and fiscal standpoint to track. In the restaurant, it's all our meat, but we source everything else from other vendors, right? Mm-hmm. And what part of your supply chain counts as patronage within a traditional co-op concept and what doesn't? And we also have a mechanism for workers to be owners in the business, but only some workers are. And so some of your labor counts as patronage, some of it doesn't. So we ended up forming Old Salt Co-op LLC, but we built it a lot the way a co-op functions. And so the way that we're different at the end of the day is that once investors have been paid off or received a certain return, now the ranches can capture a part of the restaurant margin and a part of the processing margin and a part of the brand margin and a part of our events margin. Mm-hmm. And that's how they sell the animal to Old Salt, but then they are the majority of our board. They decide what they sell it to us for, and then if it's successful, they share in the profits. And that's how we drive more of the food dollar back to land stewardship.
I see.
Which is what I give the biggest damn about is, unless regenerative agriculture isn't magic, what makes it better is that if you can support the stewards of the land with more stability, more diverse markets, they have the time and the energy it takes to think about the stream and to work with the partners, the agency partners, the nonprofit partners. What it really takes is talent and dedication to manage land well.
Yeah.
And if you're part of an operation that is continually experiencing lower and lower sliver of the food dollar and you can't expand,
right,
that land's going to be subdivided.
Do you have quite a few ranchers working with you guys?
Right now there's 5.
Mm-hmm.
The goal is to, if this works, by 2028, I hope to have 10, 15. Mm-hmm. And, who knows what it could do. I think what we've set for ourselves as a goal is try not to be too naive. It's like, I want to sell to 5,000 Montana families. It doesn't have to only be Montana, but I want a big chunk of them to be in Montana.
Right.
That doesn't seem that crazy. That seems achievable.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, 2%, less than 2% of the meat eaten in this state came from here. That seems crazy to me.
Yeah, it's crazy.
If you do your market analysis and you say, okay, how many people how many families that make over $100,000 a year and eat meat and tend to buy local are there really in the Flathead market, Missoula market, Bozeman market? It ends up being a kind of haltingly small.
Yeah.
It's like I would have to capture 10 to 15% of that percentage of that market to sell to 5,000 Montana families.
Yeah.
So can we achieve that goal? I don't know, but I think it's worth trying, and direct-to-consumer is the way to be stable over time.
Are you guys able to be competitive price-wise to like a Costco?
No.
Yeah.
No, and that's the thing is if you buy beef from us, you're going to find that it's about 30% more expensive than something that's anonymous.
Yeah.
Whether that anonymous product is high quality or not.
Right.
Somebody asked me the other day, how is your beef different than Costco? And I'm like, well, what do you know about Costco? Beef.
Nothing.
They usually know the price per pound and whether it's prime or choice.
Right.
And it might be a high quality eating experience, but it's purely anonymous.
Right.
And the thing about the world of, selling meat wholesale through a grocery store or a restaurant is no third party label is going to tell you the truth. And if it does tell you the truth, you won't know that it's the truth.
Right.
There's just so many ways to game that system. And what I'd rather do is skip the labeling process altogether and just say, get to know us. We'll try to get to know you.
Well, it's really an identical story of what you're doing as to what we're doing and we're trying to do on our side. So it's, are our knives the same price as the knives you're going to find in Cabela's? No. I mean, our knives are a bit more expensive. If you want to buy a 4-inch bladed hunting knife, at Cabela's, you're going to probably pay less than you're going to pay on our website. However, you're going to have a relationship with us because we're direct to consumer. We're also going to, warranty that product. For you guys, it's standing behind your product as well if there ever was an issue or something like that. But it's more about the fact that people can actually listen to a podcast with the owner of MKC. They can watch our YouTube channel. They can get to know our employees. They can come see us at an event. They can come to Total Archery Challenge and come meet us. They can see the families that we're all raising, and they can see that the dollars that we're spending in our community. We're supporting, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and we're supporting the Little League baseball team here in town. And, we're giving back where we can. We're giving back to veteran groups, and we're trying to be involved as we can be. And so what is that all worth to someone? I don't know. That's maybe a different answer to everybody. And yeah, if you're living on an absolute shoestring budget and you're struggling to pay your power bill each month, you're probably not buying old salt beef. I mean, that's understandable. I mean, there's some people that just literally are lucky to put any form of meat at all on the table for their kids. And if it's not that meat from Walmart, then it's probably some processed box of food that's absolutely worse. So, your business isn't for everyone.
Of course,
and ours isn't either. Our business isn't, if the cheapest thing off the shelf made in China is fine for you, then that's probably the company for you. But I believe out of 300 million Americans, there are plenty of people in this country that do care where the products they buy were made or where the food that they buy was grown, or butchered, whether it's a farmer or a rancher, where those chickens were raised, where those eggs came from, beef, pork, whatever. There's plenty of people in this country that is important to, and I would argue that it's actually a vastly greater amount more now than even 5-6 years ago. I think COVID definitely opened people's eyes, and there's a reason farmers markets are successful and growing, because it doesn't matter if it's a ribeye or a tomato. People go to a farmer's market because they want to buy from their local people and they want to know it's fresh, and it's high quality food, and they can vet the people, the 5 different people that are selling tomatoes there, and what kind of chemicals did you use, or who do you just resonate with? Yep. And who do you like? I mean, that's a big part of it too. People buy from places that they like. And so I think what you guys are doing is very similar. And the point is it's not for everybody, but there's plenty of people out there. It's your guys' job to get that word out there.
Yep.
Whether it's podcasts like this or, whatever form of marketing. And you have to continue telling your story over and over again. Early on, Brandon would put some stuff up on Instagram and I'd be like, bro, it's kind of like the same thing you said 2 months ago. And he's like, well, yeah, we have 5,000 new followers. They don't know shit about us. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's like, oh, well, that's a good point. You're going to be a bit of a broken record, but it's important and it takes that to get that word across.
Yeah. If you find what I like about the scale that we're aspiring to is that our customers can drive through any one of these valleys and see the landscape. They can smell the air. They can look at what the streams look like, whether that's Cascade and Seabed Livestock Company or whether it's the LF Ranch on the Rocky Mountain Front near Augusta or whether it's the J. Barrell Ranch in the Centennial and near the Crazy Mountains. And they can, rather than a label in some store, they can decide for themselves whether they trust that the products that are coming from that landscape. We started a crazy thing last year for the first time, and we held a thing called Old Salt Festival in the Blackfoot Valley where my family's ranch is. And 1,600 people showed up in this very rural community that sees that once a year at the Helmville Rodeo. And there was wood-fired cooking for 3 days and 13 bands and makers from across the region. And, kids going on the pasture walks and playing on the straw bales and eating food together. And I think the music and food have brought people together for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's being there is the best gauge of, do I basically trust the supply chain? Is this something I want to support? I want to see more of this or not?
Right.
Same thing with connecting with one of our restaurants on Main Street. I'm not trying to make a bunch of claims about you eat this and your health will all of a sudden become amazing.
Right.
It's more about you like this brand and what we're doing. The whole damn thing becomes better. Community becomes a better place to live in.
Well, there's a connection. It's similar to wild game. When you go out and hunt and you harvest an elk and you go through a lot of hardship to get that, there's a connection to your food when you're cooking it. And you don't want to waste it because you know what it took to get that deer or elk or whatever. It's similar when you're scraping your plate at night and do I put that chunk of meat in the fridge and eat it for lunch tomorrow or do I just throw it away? And it's like, well, shit, the Mannix kids worked hard to raise that beef. I'm gonna save that, or there's just some connection. Like I've been to that ranch, and it means a little bit more. Whether you hunt or you at least just know where your food's coming from, there is that connection that makes it feel a little bit more important. You just feel better about what you're putting on your plate.
Mm-hmm. It's funny too. I find that like you said, niche meat is not going to be for everybody. Mm-hmm. I happen to think meat's one of the most nourishing foods in the world, and if somebody truly can't afford it, go buy it commodity.
Right.
Meat gets a bad rap, but I think in a lot of ways, there's plenty of criticisms that can be leveled at the system for sure. And we're often the ones leveling those criticisms.
Right.
And yet, especially beef, it's the least confined animal in the country because it's harder to confine a cow for its whole life. Mm-hmm. And it's an incredibly nourishing product. Think about the fat and protein profile, the iron, the zinc. People are short on that stuff, and meat is incredibly nourishing. But I actually find that a lot of our customers of Mannix beef, these are people, they're not necessarily living high on the hog, but they're making values-based decisions of, I want to be a little bit more connected to my community, and I want to find products when I can that I know something about. And it's a little harder to do that with energy.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to create a shirt, like I love what Duckworth is doing, for example.
Yep.
Raising the wool down in Dillon, making these products. And you can convince somebody that, okay, I'm going to buy a $150 shirt that could have cost me $50 elsewhere, but I don't buy that every day.
Right.
A little more challenging with a commodity like food.
Right.
It's a regular thing people are buying, and so a 30% increase is real.
Yep.
But on the other hand, meat goes a long way to nourishing a body, even a little bit.
Yeah.
And
well, even if you can't make, that Old Salt meat or Mannix beef or another rancher's your consistent source of meat for the entire year, even if it's a special occasion meat or if it's something like that, any form of support that businesses like ours get, any form of support that businesses like yours get matter. I mean, I don't think people understand, we're in similar spots with our companies where for us to take the next step, the capital investment is massive. So whether it's buying a knife and telling their friends about it or giving it away as a gift, if it's buying a box of meat at Christmas and giving it away as a gift and telling someone about the story of Old Salt, even if you can't afford to eat Old Salt all year yourself, but you want to give your friends or family something special, any form of support is better than none at all. If it's buying one shirt from Duckworth or one hoodie from Origin, the companies that are trying to do things that way, that stuff matters, because if thousands of people do that one purchase, it's a big deal for those companies. And the other part of this too is being vocal with your restaurants. You guys need outlets for burger and other ways to sell your meat. And if you go to a restaurant and you ask them where they source their beef, and you ask your favorite restaurant to look into, getting their beef supply from somebody local, whether it's you guys or someone else, versus on the Cisco food truck. And those restaurants that that do, and there's plenty around that do, supporting those restaurants and telling them that, hey, this is why we came here. Yep. We came here because you have Mannix beef or Little Belt beef or whatever it is. That stuff all does add up, and business owners, those restaurant owners, hear that, and if they know that's a thing, they'll continue. It might come down to the end of the year, like, gosh, we could save an extra $5,000 on our overhead this year if we go away from Old Salt and we go back to Cisco or whatever. But like, hey, that's important to our customers. It's worth. We might lose more than that in revenue by changing from that. So it's important for people to be vocal.
Absolutely.
What do you see? What are your like kind of your near term goals here for Old Salt and then long term?
The near term goals are to really start to, now that we've kind of launched these 2 restaurants and a festival, to begin sharing the brand with people and get to know people. Now the goal is to really work on the meat supply chain. Yeah. To really focus on moving meat. It seems funny that 3 years down the road after you launch the company, now you're focusing on your core product. Right. But meat takes so much infrastructure, and it takes so much planning on the supply chain side, because the animal is born and is 28 months old or 36 months old by the time it's finally processed. There's a lot that goes into setting things up. Yep. Building that whole capital stack, building the team. The first guy I met, Andrew Mace, had grown up in Laurel, spent 13 years in Portland kitchens, learning the restaurant industry, and he's a super talented guy. But I needed to meet him before I could take the next step. Yeah. And then Kent Schoberly, he came from Texas. He was working in the film industry, designing, like, how do I make a computerized version of a musculoskeletal structure? Oh. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to trade in my computer mouse for a sharp knife. And he went to work in the butchery trade, and he's a magician with meat and value-added products. Yeah. And it took me meeting Kent to have the confidence, okay, we're starting to build the expertise on our own team where we can really deliver. Yeah. And so now it's about getting, the website, e-commerce delivery, the user experience, and then the actual delivery experience. So in Montana, we'll deliver on routes 2 days a week. We'll show up in a community like the Missoula area. We'll see once a week deliveries. Bozeman area, you'll see once a week deliveries. Yeah. And you order online and we meet you. Out of state, we cold ship. Yep. Figuring out all those different processes and what kind of margin do you need to cover the cost of the installation and the packaging and the carrier fees. Right. And so now we're about to be ready. A guy showed up from Arizona on Sunday night this week with his life in a U-Haul, and he's the guy that's going to lead the growth of that. And he had grown up, worked for some fancy business consulting companies, but grown up in Montana, had a real connection to ranching, and he's not doing this because he's going to become a multimillionaire, but he's doing it because this matters. This is exactly the kind of impact I want to see.
Right.
So we get Graham with his feet on the ground, and we start really learning how to, the commodity supply chain kind of does this for everyone right now.
Right.
But to build all those pieces in microcosm and create these little regional economies of customer and producer and all the manufacturing and distribution that needs to take place in the middle, is you're really rebuilding infrastructure. And in a lot of cases, Helmville used to have a butcher shop, sort of, not a inspected butcher shop, but it would be a place that, as you were feeding the mining camps,
sure, the
stuff existed, but it's not like we're going back to that era. I mean,
right.
They were doing it for home use and for local people. In the farmer's market, for example, it's a great thing, and it's a great way to meet people. And on the meat side, we've always lost money at the farmer's market. So unless the farmer's market is a tool to build a brand that can get to enough scale that it actually supports intact landscapes and supports real families.
Right.
So you've got to get from tiny to medium and then not go so big that it becomes anonymous again.
Right.
But finding that sweet spot in the middle. And I think for us, the sweet spot is 20 million in sales.
Right.
So to get to that, and then you say, okay, does it make sense? Now we've got these distributors that are bringing a whole bunch of product to Montana, and those trucks go back empty. Montana raises way more livestock than we can consume here, even though we, like I said earlier, of all the meat eaten in the state, 2% of it was raised and processed here.
Yeah.
Still, if this starts to get traction, now all of a sudden there's opportunities for more ranches and for wholesale, and send those distributors back full with a really high quality all Montana product.
Right.
That is how it begins to build a little bit. And now all of a sudden, instead of 5 or 6 producers, 20, 25, 30.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's awesome. Real quick, tell us about the Old Salt Festival. When is that? And is it open to the public?
Yeah, June 21st through the 23rd. Tickets are going pretty fast now, which is exciting. Last year we had 1,600, and this year the goal is 3,000. And it's kind of it's a food festival kind of first more than anything else. There's 3 chef teams each day that are preparing kind of a course of 4 things, kind of bites, tapas, and it's all from Old Salt meats and produce from the landscape from around Montana.
Yeah. And
the exception to that on Sunday is a kind of a fun deal where there's a guy named Spike Jurdy and his team he's got a thing called Woodbury Kitchen. There's another one called Black Sauced Kitchen, and that whole team is coming out bringing oysters and blue crab from their region and doing a mashup of Montana meats. And it's all cinder block fires, cooking over cherry wood, and families and kids standing around the fire and grabbing bites and just connecting with each other. Kids playing on the straw bales. There's 18 bands, kind of lesser known acts that are still really high quality music stuff. We're trying to get.
I think you guys invited my cousin, actually, Matt Robertson. He lives down in Arizona now, but he texted me about it
on the music side.
Yeah. He's cowboy music.
Cool.
Somebody from your guys' team reached out.
Sterling's been organizing the music. He must have known.
Yeah, Matt's pretty well known in the rodeo scene and cowboy music, cowboy poetry, and stuff like that. And so it was kind of funny that he texted me. He's like, "Hey, do you know anything about this?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know a heck of a lot about it, but I know exactly where it's at and the family that's doing it, and it's cool." So I'm not entirely sure what he all ended up deciding to do because he's down in Arizona, but I think he's spending the summer up in Canada on a ranch. So.
It's kind of cool. I mean, we're getting artists that are kind of right at that stage before they get big.
Right.
One year they hire them for $7,000, and the next year you're gonna have to be at $100,000.
Yeah.
So finding that kind of quality of music, but in a budget that can make sense for a little startup festival.
Yeah. Well, it's a great time of year for people that are out of state. And there's no more beautiful valley, and there's also lots of hiking around. There's fishing. I mean, that's a phenomenal time of year to come for people. And so hopefully, if anyone's listening to this, they'll look that up and consider coming to Montana. Besides the people that are local. Yeah,
it's really like even last year. Certainly, the majority are from Montana, but Hawaii, Colorado, California, New York, Texas.
Yeah.
North and South Carolina. People showed up from all over the country. Some people just saw the tent city driving on Highway 141 and are like, what in the hell is that?
Yeah, spoiling. Yeah.
But there's a big general store with 40 makers who are doing stuff with leather and wool and knives.
Yeah.
And
It's awesome.
there's mule packing demo. There's kind of a low stress livestock animal husbandry demo, an iron forging deal, butchery demo. So there's poets and writers from around our region. It's really about the culture in regenerative agriculture. And that's not just producers, it's just everybody who's got skills along that supply chain is making really cool shit.
I can see this thing being in the next few years just turning into something that's massive. I really do think it's cool.
That connection is just, and again, back to Mannix beef and why did we start selling local? It was because, like my generation in particular, it's still not what really feeds the family. It's the commodity system is 70% of our sales, right?
Yeah.
But the 30% that we do is a better margin.
Right.
And it's also a way better way to live. I mean, the fact that we can get to know the customers, they end up bringing their families out, and we meet them.
Right.
And then we have a festival, and it starts to feel more meaningful what you do for a living.
Right. No, it's fulfilling for sure. Well, cool. Well, thanks for coming and joining. And do you ever you ever see yourself back on the ranch someday when you're older and actually working on the ranch?
When I was first met my wife Eileen, before we got married, I was like, could you see yourself in Helmville someday? And she said, I think so. Yeah. She had just grown up in Helena, not too far away.
Yeah.
And it turns out as we got going, she was like, I'm not so sure. That's a quite different way. I was the only kid in my class for a big chunk of grade school, and that's a little bit different for some people. But I could see.
Yeah.
But my mission right now is to build this kind of regional meat economy through Old Salt.
Yep.
And we'll see how that goes. Right now, there's a lot of. I think we're really lucky to have my siblings and cousins and all back and being part of that community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe I turn 50 and I'm like, okay, it's time
to go back. Yeah. Well, it's pretty cool what your family has done. That's really cool that your family stuck together. When the unfortunate side of ranching is when the old patriarch, passes away and there's multiple kids involved, and ranches are worth a lot of money, especially in those areas. And it's a hell of a lot easier to sell it and go to a lake somewhere and go vacation. But, you sign up kind of for a life of some difficulty, but also, I would argue it's more fulfilling than anything you can imagine. And in the end, we're all going to die. Yep. And, once you sell, I told a friend of mine this once, when he was just out of high school and thinking of selling his family ranch and didn't. But I told him then, I'm like, man, you sell that, you never get it back. I don't care how much money you get, 5-10 years from now, you regret it. You're not buying it back. It's gone. And, I think he, at that time, was thinking about what he could do with that money and whatnot. And, now he's running that ranch pretty much by himself, and it's every day is difficult, but rewarding. And
yeah, rich. I mean, yeah. I was listening to a podcast with Nick Offerman. Mm-hmm. You know who Nick Offerman is? He's Parks and Rec. He's that tells a story about sitting in the pool after he had kind of made it in L.A., and he was married to a woman that made it too, and he was floating there for whatever it was, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and like, okay, what's the next step?
Yeah.
And he started a little wood shop, and they started making just beautiful furniture and art, and employing people. And weirdly enough, he was a big fan of Wendell Berry, who's like one of my heroes, and had read a bunch of Wendell Berry stuff. Wendell Berry is a farmer in Kentucky that studied under Wallace Stegner and became a big writer. And it's all about what community really is and the relationship with the land. And so the same question Offerman was asking himself is, if you were to go cash out the ranch for $50 million or whatever, and then go set up wherever you set up, and pause for a second and say, what do I want my daily life to look like? How am I going to live richly now on the cash? And I think the family just has continued. Like my dad and uncles and aunts have just been really good about teaching our generation what it's like to maintain relationships well enough. If those fragment, the land will fragment.
Right.
and living in that little community in that particular, I don't think they would ranch just anywhere. That's where their heritage is. That's the place that they want to die in.
Yeah. Literally hundreds of years of history. Yeah. And it's sad. I know of a situation right now happening where, when grandpa passes away, and unfortunately grandpa won't really step up and just say in the will, like, this kid is getting it because he actually desires to run the ranch. You know, the other kids don't want to, they want their money. And, unfortunately, like we talked earlier, no one regular person can just write a check and cash out the others and then actually operate the ranch and make it pay.
Right.
It doesn't work. So if grandpa doesn't just hand it down to one particular kid that actually wants to keep it together and make it a ranch, it'll get sold, you know. And it's cool that your guys' family has stuck together and made it less about the individual and more about the family and the community, you know.
The land is, you know, it's not, you know, it is an asset, but it's I think the family views the land and all the critters and everything as just as much part of the family. Like Old Salt says, land is kin.
Yeah.
And we really believe that. And it is an asset, but it's more than an asset. It's a whole living system. And so it's family history and it's heritage and it's the people in the community, but it's the very place itself. It's the water,
and if there's
soil.
If there's a kid 150 years from now named Mannix still running that, that's a pretty cool. It's a pretty cool chain of people that all had a responsibility and they did they took care of their responsibility. They did it. They passed it on. They, you know, passed away, and it just keeps going. It's so rare these days, and it's becoming, unfortunately, more and more rare. I mean, there's a ranch every day being sold that's been in a family for generations, and it's really, really cool. And that Mannix family name, I mean, in you know, there's just a few names in Ovando, Helmville area that are synonymous with that valley, and it's really cool what you guys have done, and the amount of respect that you guys have from your neighbors and the other ranchers around.
You mentioned Ben Slatt earlier.
Yeah.
We halfway grew up on that Two Creek Ranch because Dad and Wayne were good friends. And
what a beautiful place that is.
Oh, man, it's just absolutely world class.
Yeah.
From the streams to the setting, it is gorgeous. And, you know, they're, as a family, in their case, that doesn't own that land but have given their lives to it.
Yep.
They're experiencing the same challenges. I mean, my dream would be that I could be like, Ben, I think we're moving enough meat. Like, let's do this together.
Right.
And you've got a way different connection, even with your own neighbors in the valley, when you start, okay, now we can move products that we're really proud of and we have a particular connection with to a group of people that gives a damn about the same things.
Yeah.
I love that. That's it's about the goal of Old Salt. Like, that's the goal.
Yeah. No, it'd be really, really cool. And I think it's really neat. I've never met I think I actually maybe did when I was young, but I don't think I've ever met the actual owners of that ranch, but I have a lot of respect for wealthy people who buy a place like that and you know, have a ranch manager per se, a family that manages that and allows that really to go on for generations, you know, as Wayne gets closer to retirement and, you know, his boys, you know, pick up the slack there. They do run that ranch like they own it. They treat it like they own it. They view it as they own it. And I think that's one thing, like, you know, if you're lucky to be born and be named Mannix, you've got a really cool opportunity. But if you're born kind of anybody else, you're probably never going to own a ranch like a Mannix ranch, but you might have the ability to manage one for someone. And I think that's really cool when wealthy people actually really turn it over to that degree and just trust those people and give them the opportunity to manage a ranch that they'll probably never be able to buy.
Yeah, I mean, the Burstnells who own that place have been, I think, wonderful for the Slats, and just as much vice versa. I mean, if you own a property, it is pure gold to find somebody who will do that work day in and day out and give their lives to it and treat it like they own it.
Yep.
I mean, and so that's just a perfect example. And it, you know, like for Old Salt, it's like when you figure out how are we going to stack the capital together to build this little regional infrastructure, we need to meet those people, and we have, and that's like why we have a chance, is because whether you grew up in Montana on a ranch or whether you bought one recently because you had cash from elsewhere, really takes everybody.
Yep.
And those people are helping provide the capital to make this thing possible, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, no, it's it does take those people. You know, we locals can shit on rich people coming in, but some of those rich people coming in with that cash can be game changers and make things possible that, you know, the locals desire to do but maybe can't pull off.
Absolutely.
So some of those you know, we have to be careful as locals when we see people moving into our state to disparage them just out of hand, without understanding that they may have the same values we have, but they also have a checkbook to help make some of that stuff happen, and a willingness to they want to put those dollars maybe in a place that makes them feel good. So it takes everyone, I guess, is the point.
They wouldn't do that if they were looking for 20% return on their investment.
Right.
But they do it because there is shared values there, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know, that whole valley feels like a community in a way. It doesn't just mean people live next to each other, but they are all pulling to maintain the intactness of the landscape and the life in Ovando, the life in Helmville, life in Lincoln.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. Well, thanks for joining. How do people find you, find Old Salt, Mannix?
Yeah, you can go to Old Salt CoOp. CoOp is co-op.com. And all the stuff is there, from the festival that's coming up to the meat that we sell online to our restaurants in Helena. Mm-hmm. You can find Mannix Beef at mannixbeef.com. And if you just go through the customer contact us form, you'll get in touch with me.
Yeah, that's how it works. Awesome.
Yeah,
well, thanks for
Josh.
taking the time to come down.
I really appreciate it. It's fun too to talk about, you know, such a valley that we have common context with.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I love that entire Blackfoot Valley. It's pretty amazing.
What you're doing with MKC here is pretty damned amazing.
Well, it's similar to what you guys are doing. We're just trying to bring it back local, you know, whether it's manufacturing or growing beef, you know, we're all really doing the same thing.
Well, the podcast I stopped in and I met because I was listening to Guy on your podcast on the drive up. I stopped into the Axeman before this.
Yeah.
And got a chance to visit with him a little bit, and oh man, what a character. He is a smart human.
He's brilliant.
And I've got plenty of questions about, okay, I need to move meat around cold and I need this piece of equipment or that, but I don't want to pay out the nose for that kind of stuff. And he's full of
He's
ideas.
wise. Yeah, no, he's wise. He's a good one to connect with. He's a smart guy.
Well, and he said it was special to be able to just kind of share his story, and for his family maybe knows it, but maybe some of his friends have never heard that background. That's pretty darn cool.
Well, I think that's what's cool about podcasts, frankly. I mean, someday you'll be, you know, old and dead or whatever, and there'll be some, you know, couple generations from now, trying to figure out how to make it on the Mannix Ranch, and you know, what would you give to hear your great grandfather talk on a podcast about what he was currently struggling with or trying to do, or ideas. You know, the ideas will change, you know, with the times, and who knows what your great grandkids are going to be doing with that place and what the entire society is going to look like. But, you know, it's one thing we never really got the opportunity is to hear the voices of, you know, generations past maybe. Yeah. So it's cool. Right now you're young and just trying to survive, but, and, you know, chase ideas, but it'll be cool for future generations to hear about it.
I love it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.